right? So it's less about the act of sex and it's more about having sexual connection, pleasure all the time, right? The idea is really the erotic life.
You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
How does your current marriage dynamic help or hinder intimacy? Are you good at expressing your desires within your marriage? How does growing into your best version of yourself translate into a better connection with your spouse? And how can all of these things contribute to a really good sexual experience? These are some of the questions I've had on my mind as I reached out to Eric and Kate MacDougall, founders of Evolve Marriage. They're marriage and relationship coaches, and I hope you learn as much as I did from this amazing conversation. Eric and Kate, what a pleasure it is to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for being here.
Much. Well, thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's an honor.
Let's start with a little bit of foreplay, shall we? I want to hear about a time when you almost got caught.
It's a great question.
It is a good question.
You want to start?
Yeah, sure. There was this one time where Eric and we have 2 kids, and back then, he's 7 now, but back then he must have been 5 or 6. And he walked in on us. We were in the shower and both kids had gone to bed and we thought they were asleep. And we were in the shower, kind of getting closer.
It was commencing.
It was debuting. And our son walked in and said, "What are you doing?" We just kind of both stopped in our steps and went, nothing. And then we, had to spend a little bit of time explaining to him why mommy and daddy were taking a shower together and why he couldn't join us in the shower at that time.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. We're pretty open about talking about our bodies and life and connection.
Right.
And so it was an interesting conversation to navigate with our at the time 6-year-old.
Yeah. And he has a lot of questions.
Yeah. Needless to say, I had to get out of the shower and put him back to bed.
Yeah. And that was that for us. There was no more shower after that. Mood over.
Yeah. Ruined the evening.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thanks a lot.
So if I understand correctly, you two have been together more than you've been apart in life.
Yes.
Right?
So we have been together since I was in high school.
That's right.
And
About 18 and a half years.
Yeah.
We've been together.
Just about.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah.
So
a lot of happy years.
A lot.
A lot of tough years.
Well, maybe we'll rewind a little bit, go to the tough years and end on the good years. So
Sure.
I want to know of a time you had you did a bad job expressing what you wanted to your spouse.
Ooh, yeah.
You want just one time? We used to be really bad at expressing ourselves. When it came to our needs, our desires, what we wanted from them, it definitely was a challenge, especially in the beginning of our relationship.
Yeah, and I think just based on our upbringings and our family of origin, we both were kind of the people that served in our families, right? We were always the caregivers. So when we came to our relationships, there was a lot of unset expectations.
Mm-hmm. And
I think Kate and I both had some blockages around getting what we wanted, whether it was okay to ask for what we wanted. And even more than that, like when it was provided for us, feeling kind of bad about it.
Right.
Right. It used to really plague our marriage in terms of like oral sex, right? We'd have a lot of issues around that where Kate would be like, just ask for it.
Right.
And I really struggled with it. This idea of like, hey, can you provide oral sex to me? I was like, that's gross. Like you shouldn't need to do that. I don't want to be a burden on you. And so I think for a long time, it plagued our marriage, and we really played a lot of, covert contracts, trying to manipulate each other into getting what we wanted.
Passive aggressive. Yeah. I think I remember this specific time where, and you'll remember it too. It was probably one of the biggest arguments in our marriage and one of the biggest breaches of trust. It was actually planning our wedding, and we were planning our wedding, and I had told, Eric had talked to me, we had talked about it, and he said, I want a small wedding. I want it to be very intimate. And I said, you know what? Yeah, I think that would be great. While inside, I was thinking like, no, like I want all of my family there. Like my family is very traditional when it comes to weddings. We have all the aunts, all the uncles, all the cousins, everyone. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. Like we're gonna plan that wedding, a small wedding for sure. Yeah, like how many people is small? And Eric's like, yeah, like close family and friends, like maybe like top 40. And I'm thinking like, okay, yeah, sure. And so for me, I grew up in a home where I learned to like put my needs and desires kind of aside and not really care for myself, but care for everyone else. So I was kind of like, okay, well, if this is what Eric wants, I won't tell him until, we were getting closer to sending the invites out. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, like, we're not going to invite my aunts and my uncles, and this is not what I want. So still to this point, I hadn't expressed that to Eric. I hadn't mentioned to him like how many people I truly wanted at the wedding and how important it was for me for them to be there. So it ended up coming out in this major argument, like because I hadn't expressed that to him and because I hadn't talked to him about it, all of this anger and built up resentment was coming out in the most random times. And he came up to me one day and I remember you saying like, what's wrong? And I was like, I can't believe you want a small wedding. And I was so frustrated with him and I couldn't believe that that's what he wanted. And then he just kind of turned to me and he said, well, why didn't you say anything? Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was so hurtful to him that I had kept that from him for so long and that I hadn't expressed that huge desire I had. And I hadn't expressed to him like how important it was for me to have all those people there. And then once I did, we ended up figuring out, financially how we could do this and figuring out, okay, who do we want and how are we going to make it happen? And then we ended up having about just over 100 people at our wedding. And it was exactly like I wanted. I got to have all my aunts and uncles there and have the very traditional wedding that I wanted. So in the end, I'm really glad I opened up. But, since then we learned that how important it is to express our desires and express our needs to our partner, because obviously what we learned then was when we didn't, it created a lot of resentment and built up, anger towards this person.
Yeah. And I think what happened a lot was that we would see this trend of, it would be calm, the waters would be calm for a while. Mm-hmm. We would kind of live our own lives, kind of parallel.
Everything was going well.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, there would be a blow up of like disappointment, looking back, here's all the reasons that I'm disappointed. And what we could see is there was this trend in our marriage where both of us, we were really keeping a lot of stuff in. Mm-hmm. And there was a boiling point. I remember looking back, it was like you could literally see the trend.
Yeah.
Like once a month, there'd be a blow up and then everything would go back because we were both conflict avoidant. We didn't want to talk about anything. And I think what we realized, we've started getting into personal growth. We started reading a lot of books. And I think what we really wanted was to really understand each other. And there was a point in our marriage, probably about maybe 10 years in our relationship together, where it felt like we didn't really know each other, right? Mm-hmm. We got into this idea of like, Kate was never really telling me what she wanted. Kate didn't really know what I wanted. And as we were starting to read these couple books, it was like, well, just like do what your partner wants. Like, ask them what he wants. And you should try to do what they're asking you. And what we realized is like, we were actually never asking each other about anything. It's like we were these two lone wolves, just like living parallel lives, taking care of our own needs.
But being very polite. Very polite.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Right.
And
except that once a month blow up.
Yeah. Where it would just all come out at once. So yeah, learning to express our needs and our desires and in a healthy way was definitely a major win for our relationship.
Yeah. And I think it also made it much easier. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we realized was that for a long time, I didn't know how, we used to talk about this all the time, where one of the biggest frustrations I was experiencing is I had to guess what Kate wanted all the time. Mm-hmm. So it almost felt like I was, kind of like throwing a hook in a large ocean, trying to catch something. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll try this. And then I would wait and see, it doesn't work. And over time, guess after guess after guess, the frustration in me would build. Mm-hmm. So I would ask her what she wants. We would have these kind of roundabout conversations. And, I remember using the line all the time where it's like I'm trying to catch smoke. And I'm trying to talk to you about what you want. Yeah. And Kate just had a blockage. I had a blockage, right? Because of our own beliefs and how we were raised. And so over time, we really had to start building that muscle of like, this is what I want. And at first it was challenging.
Yeah. And for me, what I realized, and I think you told me this, and I learned it out of Laura Doyle's book, but it was very much like men need you to ask them for what they want. Men want to know how to be your husband. They are there to provide for you. And that is what, what means so much to them. So when you're clear about what it is you want, then you're actually, showing your husband how to love you. And that's what he's looking for in the relationship. So when I learned that, it was like, oh, what? Like Eric wants that? Sure. Okay. I want this and I want this and now I want that. And so now, I think it's very normal for us to ask for what it is we want. And, there's some times where, sometimes there's some things that are harder to ask for and we're still navigating and learning how to do that. But I mean, as with everything, you're constantly evolving.
Yeah, that's right. It's always like that.
So as you're getting to know each other a little better, 10 years in or so, that probably involves date nights.
Yes.
And I want to hear about your date nights gone wrong.
Date nights. Ugh. Like even just that word date nights used to cause me so much anxiety. Like we would make a point to because we have kids and life got busy and we found we weren't connecting as much, especially after having kids. And Eric used to have a really hard, a hectic work schedule. He'd work late nights and then he'd sleep in because obviously he's, at night till mid-morning and I'm getting up early for work. So we wouldn't see each other. We might see each other like a couple hours a day.
So we had to schedule date nights. It became so important for us. So then I would see that date night on Saturday and we made a point, one night I would woo him and I would plan the date night. And then the next week he would plan the date night and vice versa. We'd go back and forth like that. When it was my turn to plan, oh my gosh, I would get so nervous. And every time it was my turn to come up with something, I'd always come up with like 10 things and then they were never good enough. And I was always trying to do something extraordinary. Like I was always trying to figure out like, how am I going to make this date night great? And I remember many times Saturday night would come, the night that I was supposed to plan date night. And because I became so anxious about it, Eric would be like, okay, it's time. And I'd be like, I have nothing. I didn't plan anything because I would be panicking about it all week. Uh-huh. I think a lot of times what was happening in those moments is you were trying to think about, what does Eric love? Like, what does Eric want? Mm-hmm. How do I plan a date where Eric is going to be like, this was the best date? And I think that's probably where a lot of the pressure was coming from.
Right, exactly. And so I would look at Eric and I'd say, so oftentimes, like I remember I would plan to do a paint night or something because I'm a really creative person. I love crafting. I love painting. And I remember this one specific time I had planned a paint night. I found a video on YouTube. I had bought all the stuff. I, had the canvases and like right before the date night, I choked. I was like, I can't put Eric through this. Like Eric doesn't like painting. He doesn't want to do this. Like he's had a hard week. There's no way he's going to want to paint with me tonight. Oh, never mind. And then Eric's like, what's for date night? And I was like, nothing. I planned nothing. And so
and you'd feel like a failure.
Oh yeah. Oh, and then I would get in my head and then, I was the most terrible wife and woe is me. I don't know how to do this. And that was my biggest line. I don't know how to plan a date night. I'm so bad at it. I don't know what you like. And it wasn't until I realized that date nights weren't about what Eric liked. Date nights were about what I liked, what it was that I enjoyed, and how could I invite Eric into my world through date nights. So then I started inviting Eric to do yoga with me. And I would start inviting Eric to do paint nights with me. And I started inviting Eric to paint random lighthouses on a box.
Yes, he did, and it was great.
Yeah. And then to my surprise, Eric was like saying yes and enjoying it. And then all of a sudden he was asking me to do yoga with him. And he was asking me, to join him to do something creative. And I was like, what is happening? Like all of these ideas I had built in my head for so long, when I just took the risk and started just planning date nights that even if I went up to Eric and I was like, hey, Eric, do you want to do a paint night with me on YouTube? And Eric was like, I'm really not feeling it. I could still be like, okay, well, I'm going to do paint night on YouTube. It'll be my date night by myself. Like, poopy to you. And that never happened. But truthfully, if he had said no, I could go and do this on my own. So I think that was a huge eye opener for us to disassociate from each other and realize that, like, I didn't have to be a version of myself that I thought Eric would like. I didn't have to force myself to plan dates that I thought Eric would like. I wouldn't have to force myself to play 2 hours of PlayStation just so Eric would love me.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that we realized, one of the shifts in our marriage was we started to think about this idea of using and instead of or, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do I get what I want and Kate gets what she wants, instead of how do I get what I want or Kate gets what she wants. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times in marriages, when we think about our lifestyles, we think it's one or the other, right? In this case, when you were talking about date nights, it's like, how do I give Eric what he wants? But if I don't give him what he wants, then he's not going to want to be on a date. So it's either I give him what he wants or he doesn't go on a date with me. And I think a lot of times when you think about this idea of or, it's really about two paths, right? It's like you have only two choices. Mm-hmm. But instead, what really transformed our marriage, we started thinking about how do we create more opportunity for and, mm-hmm. right? Like in terms of like, how do I get what I want? And Eric is excited about the date. How do I, have the sex that I want and the sex that Eric wants? Instead of trying to think about this idea of, well, if Kate wins, Eric loses. And if Eric wins, Kate loses. I think that really transformed things for us, because when we started to really scale back and look at a big picture, I think what I really wanted and what Kate really wanted, was for our partner, in this case, like for me, I wanted Kate to be all of herself, mm-hmm. right? I didn't want Kate to have date nights that were planned around me. I wanted to experience Kate during those date nights, what she loved, what she wanted, what she was passionate about. And Kate also wanted to see me in my element. Mm-hmm. And so we really had to start thinking about, how does Kate fully hold on to herself, right? How does she be all of herself and really create connection so we can grow our marriage, instead of how does Kate hold on to herself or be the woman that Eric wants. Mm-hmm. And I think that that was a huge shift in our marriage, starting to think about that.
Yeah. And for me, it was like, if I needed to hold on to myself, the only time I could do that was with my girlfriends or on my own, when I would take time for myself. There was no way that I could hold on to myself and still be married to Eric. There was no way this was like, I could have that life where I could be myself with Eric.
Or that's what you thought at the time.
That's what I thought, exactly, at the time. That was a huge misconception I had. And then when I realized, like, not only can I be myself with my girlfriends, not only can I be myself with myself, by myself, but I can actually still do all these things that I love doing by myself, with myself, or with my girlfriends. I can also do it with Eric. I can, sit there and talk with him over a glass of wine and him, a nice glass of kombucha or something. Like, we can have those kinds of moments together. This isn't something I can just do with my girlfriends. I can do this in my relationship too. So it wasn't until I allowed myself to truly be myself in this relationship that we flourished as a couple.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think our intimacy really deepened because we had the freedom to be all of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the biggest barriers, kind of wrapping this up, is that takes a lot of risk, right? It does take a lot of risk to be all authentically you, mm-hmm. knowing that there's a possibility that your partner might be like, hey, I actually don't want to do this with you, right? There's a possibility that when Kate decided to say, hey, you know what, we're just going to draw caricatures of us tonight for our date. And I could have been like, this sucks. I don't really like this. Mm-hmm. And that can hurt. Yeah. But in the end, that's the risk you have to take in order to really be known and to create deeper intimacy, is that sometimes there's a risk of your partner not really being into the things you love.
Yeah. And if it's not obvious enough, I'm a very anxious person. If it hasn't come out yet, I'm a very anxious person. And to get me to understand that idea, somebody told me, when Eric met you, you were truly you. You had no idea who Eric was. So you didn't have to put on a show for him, because all you knew was who you were. And that's the person that he fell in love with. So why do you all of a sudden need to change to be someone else, or to be Eric, to be a female version of him, when he fell in love with you, with Kate? And so when I heard that, I was like, well, duh, like that makes total sense. Like, why didn't I think of that sooner? So that was something that really kind of eased my mind when it came to that, because to me, to be myself was just like, can I do that? Can I do that? And it's like, hey, I've been there. I've done that. I was me for a long time when we first met.
Uh-huh. I like that, how you talk about it takes courage.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't anything of value include some risk?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think so too. And I think that for a long time in our marriage, we were playing it really safe, right? I think we really tried not to rock the boat in our marriage. We tried to please the other person. And I think what we realized was that while there wasn't a lot of conflict, there wasn't a lot of discomfort, there also wasn't a lot of passion.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of excitement. There wasn't a lot of, what we call life energy. And over time, we really went on this journey to find more life energy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, how can we be in each other's company? And even when we're making dinner, have it be fun, right? Well, we can throw on music and we can dance and we can, do different things in order to bring more life energy, which is what's exciting for us.
We can flirt.
I love it.
Speaking of flirting and life energy and growing and everything, I want to learn how your approach to sex has evolved over your marriage too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's been a lot of years of that.
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think when Kate and I first met, we had a really linear view of sexuality. I think the way we were raised had a lot to do with it. I came from a very religious background. Kate came from a very scientific background. And I think Kate also came from a background where it was all about pleasing your man, right?
Oh, yes.
Sex was something that the man wanted, that the wife gave to him, right? And that was kind of the idea. You provide this for your husband to keep him happy.
Yeah, your job as a woman is to please the man.
Yeah. And so a lot of times in our lives around our sexuality, it was very much about I was always leading. Kate was kind of following and just giving me what he wanted, what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a long time, there was a lot of dissatisfaction from your end of things.
Oh, yes.
Right? It was like, this is not great, but this is what I'm supposed to do as a woman. I'll just give Eric what he wants and please him. And seems like he doesn't get mad when I please him, which is great.
Yeah.
At least for a few days.
He seems happy.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. It was like the push of a button. You could just, push the button and it would work.
Check the box. Uh-huh.
Exactly. And I think over time, especially when we had kids and Kate's energy and attention was going elsewhere, it certainly started to put a lot of pressure on our marriage because Kate was no longer necessarily able to just kind of be at my whim sexually and provide that for me because she was exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And it really started, especially when we had kids, started to become like taking care of an extra person in that way, right?
Yeah. And it was bad with our first kid, but I feel like I remember when we had our second, it was even worse because I had, my first, who was just over 2, and then the newborn hanging off of me all day. They were both home with me all day during my mat leave. And I remember thinking, like, am I ever going to get a moment to myself? And I remember sitting there as a new mom and looking at myself, looking at how my body changed after my second child, how did I smell? I felt like I smelled like breast milk all the time. And I'm thinking, like, how in the world is anybody even looking at me in a desirable way? Like, I feel gross. I feel overtouched, overstimulated all day. And all I want to do when Eric gets home is hand them the baby and disappear. And unfortunately, that isn't the reality. I can't do that all the time because, both Eric and I had sexual needs that weren't being met in that time. Obviously he wasn't getting as much sex as he wanted, and I wasn't getting the sex that I needed or craved at that time because I was very much in my head about it.
Yeah. And I think the second evolution after that, we kind of like got into this other phase after that, which was all about efficiency, right? It was how do we accelerate sex? How do we remove the brakes? How do we make it so that in this small pocket of time with kids, we can create a sexual experience?
So we can have the most sex possible in a week. So if we can fit in 3 sex sessions this week, even though the sex sessions are 5 minutes or 10 minutes each, at least we got 3 in and phew, winning,
Yeah.
like it. So it was very efficient. It was we realized then that like, okay, so now we're having a lot of sex, but I feel further from you than I ever have. So we were having sex, we were having penetration, but the connection was not there.
Yeah. And I think during that evolution, what was happening was we were really about the act and the idea of checking a box, right? Not only did it, I think it validated you as a wife saying like, oh, I'm a good wife. Like I'm giving my husband sex, which is great. And I think for me, it also validated me in terms of, hey, like I'm loved and Kate is paying attention to me. And so that's what we call kind of the second evolution, right? Where it's like we were having a lot of sex. It was there, right? From an outside perspective, when we were talking about it, it was like, oh yeah, we have a great sex life. But what we felt was there was some emptiness, right? Like we didn't feel connected, even though the act was happening.
Yeah. And then we hit a third evolution.
Yeah, which we love, which is kind of where we're at now.
It's
right?
where we're at now. So we realized sex is way more than penetration and orgasm. When we got away from that idea, sex became so much different in our eyes. And then we found the connection again. And you have an amazing, like, kind of baseball analogy you use.
Yeah. Well, I think the way that we talk a lot about it with couples is that when you think about sex in this linear way, right, we think about kind of the baseball diamond, right? Like, oh, I hit first base, second base, third base, I hit a home run, right? And this idea of a home run is like sexual intercourse, which is great. And I think when we're young, right, that's what we drive towards. But what we realized was that idea of sex is, number one, very linear. And oftentimes there's no going backwards, right? Like it's just, this is the progression. And so if you go to first, well, eventually you have to go to second. You can't just leave me on first, right? And I think that takes a lot of opportunity away in sex. And I think what was happening for us in our marriage was that which I'm the high desire, I'm the pursuer. Oftentimes what's happening was when I would initiate sex to Kate, she only had 2 options. It was I either say yes and we take this all the way, or it's a clear no if I'm not going to do that.
And more often than not, which one was it?
Ooh, it was a no most often than not. And I think it would leave us frustrated. Yeah. Because the last thing Kate wanted to do was leave me hanging on first base. Right? She didn't want to do that. She didn't want me to kind of do half an experience, because then that created something in her mind of how she showed up as a wife. And she'd have this idea that I would be dissatisfied. And so what we started to think about was, how do we really expand and create more freedom around the sexual experience? So how we think about sex now is much more like a sound wave, right? It gives much more freedom. So the idea for us is all about how do we create sexual energy all the time, right? So for us, it's less about the act of sex, and it's more about having sexual connection, pleasure all the time, right? The idea is really the erotic life. And so when we started to think about it like a sound wave, it became much easier just to decide how we wanted to create sound. And it was less about, hey, this is what needs to happen for us to have sexual energy, right? We need to go from to first to second to third to home, like the baseball analogy. And instead, we could just start to think about what type of sounds we loved in our sexual experience. Sometimes we create a sexual experience through text messaging back and forth. Sometimes we create a sexual experience in the kitchen when we're dancing and we're cooking. And it really gave us the freedom to start thinking about, okay, what type of sounds does Kate love in her sexual experience? And what type of sounds do I love in my sexual experience? And how do we marry them together to make this beautiful music?
So it's more fluid. It's not like discrete, start and stop to sex. Like it's more like ongoing. It's this vibrant part of everyday living. It's not like it's not like you have a distinct end and then a distinct start. It's continuous.
Exactly. And understanding that, like, hey, we can change the game of baseball. Like, we don't have to follow those rules. Sometimes we'll have the idea that I want to go all the way. I want to hit a home run. But once I'm in it, I might just change my mind and be like, you know what? First base feels really good for me right now. And this is kind of where I want to stay. And Eric might be like, oh, come follow me on second. And I might, and learning, for me especially, learning to say like, hey, Eric, I'm good here. I'm good on first. Like, I understand you want to go to second, but I'm good on first tonight. Like, let's go to second, maybe another night, but let's stay on first. Like, I'm really enjoying this. It became much more satisfying for us to have sex in that way, to be like, wow, like Kate's really enjoying this. I'm going to stay on first with her, and we're really going to like burn this first base. Instead of me forcing myself to run all the bases and hit that home run with Eric, and understanding that like sometimes we'll be like right near the home run and then being like, you know what, let's stop here. This was good. Let's stop here.
Yeah. And I think now our sexual experience is much more fluid, which before I think there was a lot of fear for Kate, who was the low desire, if you will, who would say, well, if I do this, it means I have to take this to the
right.
end.
To me, it was like, if I make out with Eric, that's it. Like, I've lit the fire and now I'm going to have to put it out. Like,
There's no turning back.
There's no turning back. But now I understand that I can light the fire. I can make it roar. I can make it as big as I want. And I have all of the powers in me.
And all the freedom.
And all the freedom, exactly. To decide whether or not I want to do with that fire. Mm-hmm. So until we started really focusing on our own desires in our sexual experiences and not really putting the emphasis so much on our partner and what does he want? What does he need? Is he enjoying this? And it became like, am I enjoying this? No. Well, how can I enjoy this better? It wasn't so much like, oh, I hope Eric's enjoying what I'm doing to him right now. It was like, how am I enjoying doing this to Eric? How is this feeling on my body? Even if I was giving him full pleasure and all of the attention was on his body, how is it making me feel to be able to give him this? Well, it's making me feel confident. It's making me feel like I can love on my husband in a way that means everything to him. And just having that idea go through my mind made me feel very excited about doing this act for him and very, happy to be doing this for him, instead of being like, well, what am I going to get out of it? And then it made me feel confident to be like, you know what? We're going to stop here. That's it. That's all.
And it's great.
I enjoyed that. Did you enjoy that? Good.
Because I was going to say, I think that actually dramatically improved our sex life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I think that really ramped up desire,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because then I'm left wanting. Mm-hmm. Which is exciting, which is all about the pursuit.
Yeah. And just because there's always this sexual energy in the house, it creates this intimate connection between us all the time. And so when we took the emphasis out of intercourse, like when we took the attention out of intercourse and moved it to outer course, that was so big for a relationship that we didn't necessarily need to have sex or connect, and have intercourse and have an orgasm, but we're actually connecting better now when, we're not having as much intercourse and we're not having as much, orgasms, but we feel so much better. We feel like we might as well be having sex 10 times a week.
I think it brings
feels
us much more
same.
pleasure.
Exactly.
I think we feel much more connected.
And we do. Yeah.
That's awesome. Awesome. Okay. Just to switch gears as we conclude this interview, let's say the person listening to this, they have a fairly good marriage. Things are plateauing a bit in the bedroom. I want to hear your black belt sex tips.
Well, my black belt tip is you cannot go wrong with updating your underwear drawer. I think there's something to be said, and knowing all of my girlfriends and, even myself, we can make those things last a little too long. So I think it's important that you go and assess your underwear drawer and see, are my underwears, is that grammatically correct? Are they pleasurable for me, but are they cute for my husband? How do I feel in my underwear? Because I think the most important is, how do I feel in my underwear? If I'm wearing, granny panties and a really comfortable bra, but I feel dang sexy in them, that's fine. But I know for most girls, buying a cute pair of, lacy underwears, something that cuts your body just right. There's nothing that makes you feel sexier than a nice pair of new underwear. So I would say that is my black belt sex tip. Update your underwear drawer.
Yeah. And I would say, for me, what's impacted our marriage the most and our sexual connection is this idea that foreplay can happen all the time, mm-hmm. and that it's completely ongoing. So I would say this idea of flirting, be playful, be sexually intuitive with things. And so I guess for me, it's all about sexy notes, text messages, right? It's not uncommon where we'll walk around with a dry erase marker around the house and put it in our own personal mirrors, little sex notes and things like that.
In the shower, on the shower walls, on the tiles.
and I think it's just about reminding each other that, hey, I see you, I still want you. And how can you just create more of those reminders in your home, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's something that we're really great at, sending each other naughty texts, sending each other little videos and pictures and things like that, in order to create that allure, that desire, and really ramp that up. So that's what I would suggest. That's really worked for us.
Awesome. Thank you. If people want to find more about what you do, where's the best place to send them?
Yeah. So probably our website, evolvemarriage.com. We are growing our Instagram following as well. So at evolved_marriage. So we're pretty active there. I would say those are the two places to find us. All our information's on our website with our podcasts and things like that.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan. This has been great.
Thank you very much.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.